Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Blogging ESTV. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Ryan Cooper. Ryan, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi. My name's Ryan Cooper. I'm a national correspondent at The Week and done a few book reviews for The Nation and Current Affairs and various other places. And yeah, that's pretty much my story.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come on. And so we're mainly going to be talking about recent pieces you've written in The Week, and we'll link to them below this on the Blogging site. And but the one that I read that made me want to ask you to come on is ran a week ago, and the headline is Obama the Pretender, and it is a sort of somewhat of a book review, but also I guess sort of a historical review, or judging. You are looking at the story Obama tells about his early presidency. I guess the time somewhat before, and I'll just read the first line, and then we can get into it. So you say, quote, "As a socialist, I have a confession to make. Back in 2008, I was a campaign volunteer for Barack Obama." So you, at least, were feeling the hope and change, at least a little bit, back then, as I was as well, although I'm not a socialist. But I guess you became disillusioned, and you have a pretty strong critique of Obama's economic record. But let's just first start with the memoir itself. It's called A Promised Land. Is that the title?
I think so. Yeah.
Would you? So I read Dreams from My Father. When after Obama made a big splash in 2005 or whatever, when they reissued that, and I think I maybe even read Audacity of Hope. But then I saw that this one was coming out, and that it's like 750 pages, and it's only the first of two, and it's also $45. So that's pretty expensive for a book. Would you, just as a book, just as a political memoir, would you recommend this one or not?
As a book, it's not bad. I mean, it's certainly better than most political memoirs. If you ever cracked open a book by like Marco Rubio or something, you expect ghost-written trash that's just like, here's my non-threatening family, and here's why I just love America so much. Obama is a pretty good writer, and I think it's certainly valuable historically as a sort of apologia for his decisions. And there's a lot of interesting kind of anecdotes in there, and a lot of like pretty good flourishes, I would say. I don't know. I mean, your mileage may vary individually, but I would say it's worth reading. I don't think I would pay $45 for it. I certainly didn't. But
Right.
If you manage to find a copy someplace, then it's certainly interesting, if infuriating at times.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, he, as far as we know, he did write this himself, whereas, usually these sorts of things are written by professional ghostwriters. But Obama sort of made his a national name for himself through his writing and the speeches that we think in his early career he wrote for himself, because he wasn't famous enough to hire people to write speeches for him. And then I was, there was some, just in the past couple of days, I've seen, maybe because people are talking about the book, I've seen some throwbacks to, people who thought that Bill Ayers, the former Weatherman member, actually wrote Obama's memoir. That was like a big conspiracy theory on the right. There's no way this guy could write this book, actually. So actually it was Bill Ayers, or, maybe someone, other like boogeyman on the right. I remember there's also this bizarre theory that like Obama's father was actually this different guy who was like a member of the American Communist Party. And so there's
it was Francis Bacon.
All the, so there was also the right-wing craziness from 10, 15 years ago that is coming back to us. But no, it's like, he's an intelligent person. He's a good writer. Like he wrote this himself. But okay, so, read if you're interested. But okay, so you really take issue more with his the presentation of the events surrounding the financial crisis in 08 and 09, and what his administration did and what he did before even he was in office in late 2008, and what versus reality. And so let me read another excerpt from your piece. So you write, Obama attempts to grapple with the massive failures of his presidency in a promised land, but ultimately the book is slippery and unconvincing. America is circling the political toilet in part because Obama had the chance to fix many longstanding problems and did not rise to the occasion, a fact the former president is still stubbornly unwilling or unable to see. And you write that and then you focus on what you say are the three most important policy decisions of his presidency: the 2008 bank bailout, the 2009 Recovery Act stimulus, and his foreclosure policy. Okay, so can you talk a little bit more about what you think Obama did wrong and how he is whitewashing it, or his excuses, or what's he saying now about it?
Yeah, so, I mean, basically, I could sort of characterize all three of these as being, a problem of kind of timidity and status quo bias. In 2008, right, you had the TARP bailout being negotiated, and George Bush was checked out from governance. He wasn't really doing much of anything, and it was Hank Paulson who was taking the lead, and Timothy Geithner, who was the head of the New York Fed at the time. And Paulson wanted, a blank check, basically. He felt like he was politically exposed and that the administration was too unpopular and he was taking all these decisions that had no sort of justification. And so he went to Congress, which was controlled by Democrats at the time, if you remember, thanks to the 2006 blowout election. And in particular to Obama, who was, I think, at this time had not won election. He was just widely expected to win. And he was the nominee and sort of leader of the party. And he said, okay, we need to get this through. And Obama's like, all right, whatever you say, Paulson. And even says it in his memoirs, like, if I wanted to be president, I need to start acting like it, something like this. I quote the line in the piece. Never thinking that to be suspicious of this guy and his motives. So you're talking about a Republican, conservative guy who was just before this the head of Goldman Sachs. Why would you trust this guy to fix the crisis in any kind of, particular way? And so even though, the first bailout, which is a total blank check, just like 3-page bill that says here's $700 billion that Treasury Secretary Paulson can do whatever the hell he wants with. That didn't pass because of massive outrage. And they came back for a second bite at the apple. House Democrats stuck in some more, oversight and stuff. So this is, 12 years ago. What was going almost? Yeah. I guess we're in December now, but this is like 12 years and 2 months ago. And they tried to pass this initial bill close to a blank check. It failed. And then the stock market had like the biggest one-day loss since 87 or something. I think it was actually 666 points, because I remember that because everyone was joking about, the satanic number there. And so everyone freaked the fuck out and they realized, oh, this is, things are going bad here. And then they rallied and came back with with a second bill that maybe some of it was that people didn't realize how tenuous the stock market was at the moment, and also they put in some stuff that would appeal to get more votes from certain representatives. It failed in the House, right? Yes, I think so. It didn't. I don't think they even took it to the Senate. But right. Yeah, it failed. They put some more conditions on there. That's where the Inspector General, the Neil Barofsky, came from. But yeah, I mean, basically the recession was already starting. It was already very bad. The world financial system was like grinding to a halt. Something had to be done. And basically the approach that Paulson and after him Obama, Obama got Geithner on to be his Treasury Secretary, and then later renominated Ben Bernanke, who's head of the Federal Reserve, the other key player in all this. Their approach was basically the system's melting down. We can't do anything about fundamental reform. We have to just stuff money into it until it's not falling apart anymore. and not doing what would clearly be, a kind of small c conservative view to say, like, the system is broken, it needs reform. This should be the time to fix it now, not later after it's been reconstituted in its form. It's like incredibly rickety form, which is basically where it is now. Like, if you are at all skeptical of, financialization, and like the outsourcing of, manufacturing stuff, and just looking at how Wall Street had been so irresponsible, handing out all these loans to people, including Obama himself. At the book, he got a $45,000 home equity loan without any inspection, with him only having to take in a couple of pay stubs. They just handed him the money. Like, clearly something is wrong with this system, and yet they didn't do anything at the moment where it was most vulnerable, where they could have actually fixed it, instead of just sort of propping it back up again so that it could later, implode, as it certainly will, over and over again, until you actually address the underlying issues with the structure of the system, mm-hmm. which Dodd-Frank did not do, despite many, salutary characteristics. And that, I would say, is a sort of general mistake. And it was the same, in the stimulus discussion, it was sort of the flip side of this. It's like, so now, we buffaloed this bank bailout through, which was really unfair, really unpopular, but it had to be done because otherwise the economy is going to collapse. We're going to have a second Great Depression. Now it comes time to pass a stimulus, and they're like, oh, we can only get $700 billion, $800 billion. We're not going to try even anything bigger than that because it's politically unrealistic somehow. We're not going to go to Congress and do the same routine we just did with TARP and say, if you don't pass this, the economy is going to die. We're going to, go up to our own inspector and, Joe Manchin, hat in hand, and say, oh, please, sir, how much, what is the lowest possible number that you could, ask for? And then even, as Reed Hunt writes in his book on the crisis, he was an Obama fundraiser. He personally went to Geithner and Larry Summers, who was, Obama's head of the Council of Economic Advisors, mm-hmm. and Peter Orszag, who is the Office of Management and Budget head, and pitched him on a green infrastructure bank, because $1 appropriated gives you $10 lent. Increase your stimulus bang for your buck by 1,000%. They didn't want to do any of that. Alice Rivlin, who was a famous austerity, deficit hawk, who set up the Congressional Budget Office, told them they could game the budget window, 10-year budget window, saying, okay, this is calculated over 10 years, so you do a whole bunch of stimulus, and then you can offset it by putting tax hikes that don't take effect for 5 years after the crisis will hopefully be solved.
Which is kind of like the inverse of the Bush tax cuts expiring after 10 years. It's in order to fit this 10-year budgetary window that, is important for all these bizarre reasons.
Yeah, or they could have refinanced all state and local debt, which is usually fairly high interest. You could say, well, the federal government has, basically zero interest rate at this moment on its debt. So we'll just refinance everything and give states and cities a bunch of budgetary running room because they ended up having to cut a whole bunch of, jobs and services because they're, ran out of money. Didn't do that either. And, we can get into foreclosure. That's a complicated story too. But I think, again, this shows you the basic problem with the way Obama is presenting himself. He says it's that we can't nationalize the banks to get rid of all the bad debt, because it would have done violence to the social order. It would have been too radical. It would have, made things worse. It's not, small c conservative or, politically cautious or anything like that to fail to fix big problems because they require big action. That's just timidity. What happened was incredibly radical in its way. It was a lost decade. We had growth in this country went down by 40%, never recovered. It was, disastrous on all the ways that even neoliberals like to judge their own success. And it's just, I think it's rhetorical cover for a guy who just didn't rise to the occasion, and wants to pretend that the reason was that he was just too, he was too responsible rather than the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me offer what the pushback that that came to my mind, and you know the details of this era. I haven't read the book, so you know both Obama's version of the details and the action, and whether they diverge from reality better than I do. But let me offer somewhat of a rebuttal. So I guess I would, when I reread your piece, I was surprised, that you say the three most important policy decisions of his presidency: the bank bailout, the Recovery Act, and his foreclosure. Well, the bank bailout wasn't his presidency, technically. I mean, not even technically. It was in 2008. He wasn't inaugurated until January 2009. So this was, Bush's appointees trying to solve this crisis, and he was involved in some way, but it wasn't a sure thing that he was going to win. And the fact of the crisis helped probably push his margins up or something, but it was still. Like 2 months earlier, it was pretty close, and I believe when Sarah Palin was picked, maybe the polls are saying gave McCain the lead slightly. So he was a first-term senator in late 2008, so he participated in this, but he wasn't making the decisions, and he wasn't the Senate Majority Leader or anything like that. And so
he was leading the negotiations on the Democratic side in Congress.
Okay.
And his advisors told Hunt that they could have gotten more concessions. They could have gotten limits on executive compensation or more homeowner relief. They just didn't ask for it because they thought it would be irresponsible.
Right. And, as you were describing what they didn't do, a line, a quote came to me that supposedly came from a member of, the White House, never let a crisis go to waste or something like that.
Yeah.
And the person who said that, Rahm Emanuel, supposedly.
Yeah.
I think this was this is like someone saying he said this at a meeting or something. And that was taken by the right to mean we're going to start putting conservatives in FEMA camps or something. But, so at the time, Rahm was like, we need to do something big here. And for whatever reason, it didn't end up being as big as necessary. So, so part of it is they didn't know how big the crisis was at the time. It's easy to look back.
Yeah.
They underestimated the size of the fall in GDP. And so that changed how aggressive they wanted to be in the stimulus. Correct me if I'm wrong. In 2008, the crisis came sort of slowly and quickly. I believe in March, which one failed first? Bear Stearns or Lehman? I think Bear Stearns failed.
Bear Stearns, yeah. It didn't fail.
Right. It was about to fail. And the Bush administration saved it, or put it on a glide path, so that there wouldn't be bank runs,
shotgun marriage,
bank runs or something, right? Yeah, and so it ended up with at Bank of America or something, and then they didn't do that when Lehman Brothers was about to fail, and that's what sparked the crisis. So they took some extraordinary steps to save Bear Stearns of something that was not like what had ever been done, maybe since the Great Depression or something. And then they decided we can't do this again. And I guess in retrospect, that was a stupid decision because it sparked this, the crisis coming on very quickly instead of maybe happening more slowly. They could have responded to it more effectively. But so I think, so they, at the time it was is the whole thing going to fall apart? And obviously, they Bush didn't want to let the big banks go under, and neither did Obama. Now, the question of nationalization was sort of a live one, I guess, at the time, or should you put them in, I don't know, government receivership and they fire all the top executives or something, and then 6 months later it would return to the private sector or something. So they didn't do anything, like that. They didn't, no one was, as far as I know, no one at any big bank was prosecuted, and they all got their, they got their bonuses and so on and so forth. And so Obama definitely could have been a lot meaner to Wall Street in terms of some sort of a sense of justice. These assholes screwed this whole thing up, and it's time for them to be punished. Now, would that have been good or bad for the economy? It would have made us all feel better to see these guys in handcuffs or whatever, or seeing them, getting their $1 billion bonuses clawed back. Would it have been good for the economy or not? I don't know exactly. It's I mean, you could think that it would be justice, but it would have been worse for the economy if we're like, Lehman Brothers and now Goldman Sachs too. Like, you are essentially no more, and we're calling the shots now. Like, you can see that being that extending the acute economic crisis at the time. I have no idea if that would have happened, but
Yeah. Well, so I think you could break those things apart. The main reason I would say, aside from, equity, fairness, to say that, like, you guys caused the crisis, you should not benefit from it. You should be punished. That's just decent politics, you might say.
Right.
That was why TARP was so unpopular. But I think the economic problem had to do with the allocation of the losses from the bubble. You had all these homes, which were hugely overvalued, and then you had all of these subprime assets that were based on the value of these homes, and so you had lending that had taken place against assets which had lost, in many cases, like half or 75% of their value. Who's going to take the hit?
Right.
And so they didn't look ahead to think about, how do we get rid of this at the time? Because it's like, okay, the system is seizing up. And, as you say, it went into full crisis mode when Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. And that, I believe, was the immediate precipitating event for the Fed to basically seize control of AIG, the world's biggest insurance company.
Right.
That was also the counterparty for a lot of bets, the hedges that the big banks had made against the subprime collapse. If AIG goes down, the whole system goes down. And so the sensible way to deal with this, from a kind of accounting perspective, you might even say, would be to go, okay, there's massive losses, trillions of dollars have just evaporated. Who is best able to take those hits? And the answer should be the banks. The banks should be, because these are, composed of wealthy individuals, and they're supposed to be the people who, the reason they get so much money is because they allocate risk. They take a risk to make these lending, and then you say, okay, if this is going to drive you into bankruptcy, well, that's when the government's going to step in, just like they did with AIG, to make sure that these firms don't fail. And we'll keep them solvent, we'll keep them running so the system doesn't collapse. And we're going to get rid of all of this debt through bankruptcy rather than pushing it onto homeowners. And that brings up, I think, the worst part of the early Obama record, which was the foreclosure problem.
Right.
And that's what they did, because they didn't allocate the subprime losses during the TARP bailout. They still had all of these loans on the books. And what they chose to do was to push the losses onto homeowners, the people who are least able to take the hit. Previously, Obama had promised House Democrats he was going to support cram down, which would alter the bankruptcy law such that homeowners could write down the value of their mortgage to the value of the home in a bankruptcy proceeding. So If you had an $800,000 home that's lost half its value, you could declare bankruptcy. In bankruptcy, you're usually allowed to keep your home, write off half that value, get you, squared away. Geithner convinced Obama to renege on that promise. They told House Democrats over and over, don't put it in all these must-pass bills. The stimulus was one. So it never passed to this day. Another thing they did as part of the Home Assistance Mortgage Program, HAMP, they didn't include any principal reductions in the program, which is the most effective form of homeowner relief. Principal reductions, obviously reducing the amount owed on the principal. The reason they didn't do either of these things is because bankrupting out that debt or reducing the mortgage principal, that blows a hole in the bank balance sheets that they just spent all this money propping up instead of dealing with the problem. And so, I agree with you in one sense that it's not just Obama. I think what he was is a culmination of a total intellectual failure to understand what was happening on Wall Street. Because that was a real, like, whenever the TARP thing was going on, Democrats didn't even have a counteroffer. They just went with whatever Paulson said because they had no idea what was going on, no idea what to do. And, they had been the party of passing all these deregulation. Clinton passed 2 big packages of financial deregulation in the 90s and one in 2000, as I recall. And so, he was just sort of going with the flow, but I think it still speaks to his, a particular kind of institutional timidity, you might say, that he didn't, look at this world historical thing and this crisis and think, whoa, hang on. Maybe Wall Street seemed like it was running fine, like we were doing globalization, the Lexus and the olive tree, the capital, no borders, and so on and so forth. But when that whole thing exploded, it seems to me like it really called for a drastic rethinking of the entire system. And that's what we didn't get.
Right. So you used the word that I was about to bring up, which is, you said institutional timidity. I think what a lot of people didn't understand at the time, and a lot of people still don't understand about Obama, is he is an institutionalist to his very bones. And looking back, should we be shocked by this? He went to Columbia and Harvard Law and was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. There's not a lot of radicals who get that position, or at least not in 1982, whenever that was. And because of all the nonsense that was talked about him on both sides, much more nonsense on the right, that he's a Kenyan radical Marxist. He wasn't actually born in America. His father is secretly a couple dozen different guys, possibly. Blah blah blah. Dinesh D'Souza bullshit. And the fact that he is black and has an unusual name and unusual life biography, he was seen as like this radical transformational figure, when really he's just an institutionalist. Like his plan that he embraced for health reform was propping up the system as it existed and bringing people who don't have access to health insurance into the system, and essentially paying off the insurance industry to accept these poorer, sicker people into the system. So he made the entire insurance industry system stronger. Or at least that was sort of the goal of Obamacare. Maybe it didn't actually work. And if you look through his decisions, like, he wasn't going to be the person who took a sword and cut down Wall Street. He was the person who's like, okay, Wall Street is a big institution. We need to protect it. And so it would have been, if he had taken all the assholes at the top, or even somewhere towards the middle of the big Wall Street banks, the big investment banks, especially, to if he had taken them to task and excoriated them, or even tried to have the Justice Department, go after them, I don't know. It's just not who he is. There's no, his introduction onto the American stage was, there's no red states, no blue states. Like, we're all in this together. So a lot of this is pablum, but it was popular pablum back then. And, people really, after the Bush years, people were like, yeah, this guy wants to bring us together. I think a lot of people actually thought that it was going to work. And so why didn't it? Well, the GOP decided total opposition from the very beginning would be their strategy, and it basically worked. And yeah, he wasn't like some fire-breathing radical. He was like a center-left moderate, really, in his heart. And so, the things you haven't noted are, I believe, the stimulus passed with 3 Republican votes combined from both houses of Congress. The Democrats had 58 votes for a long time because Al Franken was not seated because his election was very close, and there's all these lawsuits. He wasn't seated for 6 months. Ted Kennedy died. So there was an 8-month period of time or something where they actually had a filibuster-proof majority, and Mitch McConnell was now in charge of the Senate GOP, and he was running on total opposition, and said his main goal was to ensure that Obama was a one-term president. So he failed in that, but he McConnell succeeded sort of overall in changing the norms of how DC works, and he certainly proved himself to be a very able and person who getting judges confirmed and doing the will of Trump or whoever whoever it is. So there's that Obama just like is really he wasn't a radical. He's not a radical. He's basically a moderate Democrat. I mean, look who he picked for his vice president. Another an even more like centrist Democrat. And yeah, so there's that. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention, which was a name that maybe will send send us back a decade or more. Rick Santelli, who was this guy who gave he was doing like a broadcast on CNBC or something from the Chicago Board of Trade at the floor there, and he started talking about maybe there should be a modern day Tea Party because the thing that he was talking about in that instance was refinancing mortgages, I believe. And so the date of that, I looked it up, was February 19th, 2009. So it's a month into the Obama presidency. And there you have the seeds of the opposition movement that would, take over Congress and in some ways, sort of take over our lives if we connect Trump to that sort of movement. So that they had more sort of sensible goals about the deficit and stuff. But the thing that rallied the Tea Party wasn't like anything to do with the bankers. It was this idea that like the guy down the block like took out a second mortgage to do like renovations to his house, and he was going to get away with not paying for it, and that was unfair. And that was the rallying cry that led the GOP opposition, and that was sadly effective at the time.
I mean, it was effective because the Democrats, they allowed it to be effective, I would say.
Well, okay.
People were very mad, but so let me deal with that part first. So it's like I think the best example of this, there's giving in to somebody like Santelli, or thinking of him as being like a representative of some kind of like mass political, in unstoppable political movement. Remember Acorn?
Yes, I do.
This was a group that did voter registration, largely nonpartisan, but it was kind of institutionally affiliated with the Democratic Party in a sense. And that James O'Keefe,
he's been around for a long time. He's dropping more tapes today. That James O'Keefe, you can't keep him down.
Yeah, he did a bunch of misleadingly edited videos that were implying that a handful of these places had like somehow, tried to hook him up with prostitutes or something like that. And it was basically all lies. And the Democratic Congress killed Acorn based on this obvious fraud. Like they had a panic attack because Fox News was criticizing them.
So that was cowardly. And most of these people are cowards, essentially. And you call Obama, I believe in the last line of your review, you call Obama a coward.
Yes.
I wouldn't go that far for him, but I think for the rank and file, Democratic congressperson, I would say they're essentially a coward. But the system, as it existed then was amenable to someone like James O'Keefe or Rick Santelli, sort of hijacking the conversation. And then you have Obama, giving speeches about you talked about anger, like Obama's the anti-anger candidate, and which makes the whole like the roots of Obama's rage like thesis from D'Souza and these types so absurd because he's like never displays anger whatsoever and is always calm, cool, collected, and maybe that was not a good fit for the emotions of the country, but that's who he was, and he wouldn't change that. But yeah, so Fox News threw their lot in with whatever James O'Keefe was doing, or with these they helped build up the Tea Party. A wealthy pair of Midwestern brothers, gave a lot of money to support their activities. Although one of them, I guess, seems to regret it now. I'm referring to the Koch brothers, of course. And the entire system was set up so that the Koch brothers get their way and Acorn gets undone. It's like doesn't even exist anymore. So you could try to what are the things that could have been done to try to upend that dynamic? I'm not sure what Barack Obama could have done. basically, I mean, so the reason I was interested in talking to you about this to begin with is like, did Obama basically do more or less kind of like the best job he could have, or did he really like screw the pooch and like he fucked it up? And I guess in your view, like he was just the wrong man for the job at the time, and
He was, I would say, he was the wrong man in charge of the wrong party. Because again, it's not just him, but it is also him. I mean, he's the person that Democrats defer to. He's very popular among the rank and file to this day. And he's
selling his memoir for $45, and there's going to be a second one. It's a bestseller, I'm sure.
Yeah, just like Ulysses Grant. But I mean, for an example, inside the administration, I once interviewed Shirley Sherrod. Remember her?
Oh, God, yes.
Breitbart did a similar thing where they did a misleadingly edited video. She was at an NAACP conference talking about how basically she had a religious experience that taught her to help a poor white person. And they cut off the end of the video, making it seem like she had told him to go packing without the, and the administration panicked so badly once they heard about this on Fox News that the Department of Agriculture called her up, made her pull over to the side of the road and type out her resignation on her BlackBerry before they even heard her side of the story. And it's just like an entire generation of politicos who had taught themselves to internalize the Fox News worldview as being like the dominant, force of American politics. That like we can't do homeowner relief because this banker asshole is going to complain on television about it to a bunch of other bankers. As if this, there's no way we could possibly spin our way out of this.
Well, but if we look back on it, like, okay, so the Sherrod thing, I agree, that's like probably one of the, most like shameful things that, the Obama administration did. I think it was like, was it Tom Vilsack? All these names from 10 years ago. Yep. He was the one who like, he was the agriculture secretary. He cashiered her, and then like a couple of days later, like Obama called up. Once it became clear this is all bullshit, he called up and like apologized, like, we want to rehire you, and she said no, which is, that's her decision, obviously. Yeah, so that was pathetic, and was an example of, the Democrats letting the GOP write the tune and like dancing along to it. But if you look at like, the big grassroots left movement at this time was Occupy Wall Street, and comparing that to the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street was doing these things where like leaderless meetings and the people's microphone or whatever, where someone would give a speech by like spreading it, saying everybody like repeats a few syllables. So it was all this sort of stuff that doesn't really affect actually power in the United States, shown by the Tea Party getting their like their crazy people like literally elected into Congress. And maybe there's like a little, wherever in Zuccotti Plaza or whatever it was called, there's like a little monument to Occupy Wall Street. And some people made the argument that like the Sanders movement grew out of that. I didn't really see the logic of that, but yeah, I just like the GOP is much better at taking populist anger and turning it towards their ends, as shown by the fact that Trump is getting seemingly millions of our fellow Americans to believe that like there's a grand plot to steal the election from him that involves the late Hugo Chavez, and like they'll just believe. I mean, it really is kind of like the GOP elite has contempt for the GOP base and will feed them whatever shit they want at the moment, and they know that they'll eat that shit. Whereas the liberal or left base or whatever like doesn't have that relationship with the Democratic elites, and they won't eat their shit, and they won't dance. They won't do whatever they say or support whatever the line of the day is, as they do as the right does with Trump.
Well, I think you've put your finger on the problem, though, is that Democrats don't want to harness any of that populist anger, because their whole policy orientation is about deflating, tamping down on populism so that they can appease the donor class, or like the groups that are perceived to be necessary, Wall Street, the insurance industry, and so on. So you can't do what in my view would be a completely reasonable political approach to say, like, let's do some Vox.com wonkery. What is the most important determinant of the success of an incumbent party in an election? The state of the economy. What determines the state of the economy in 2009, 2010? The size of this stimulus package. And then you bring in all the blue dogs and you club them over the head with the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money by John Maynard Keynes. And you say, hey, look, guys, look, this is not normal deficit time. We are in a crisis. And if the unemployment is 10% on election day in November 2010, you all are going to lose your seats. So you got to get behind this big stimulus. I mean, people like Paul Krugman are saying, the data could be an underestimate. What you need to do, you're only going to get one chance. Take whatever number you think it should be and add 50% just in case. Can't hurt. They didn't do any of that stuff. And similarly with mortgages, I think, the way through that would have just been like, okay, we're going to get some outrage and people are going to be pissed on Fox News, but we will have a clearly defensible benefit that we can point to people. And if we just sort of eat the bad media cycles from the right, we go out and defend ourselves with more confidence. We're like, hey, look, we bailed out the banks. We're helping the homeowners too. People, maybe they didn't make the best decisions at the time, but we're just sort of getting them back to basics, back to flat instead of $800,000 underwater or whatever. And this is, I think, again, it comes back to the sort of character question, and how the party as a whole is just so unwilling to govern, except in cases of where, rich people are in trouble. Because, it's, and I mean, I guess this sort of bears on the institutionalist thing because, Columbia is an institution and the insurance industry is an institution as well. But so is like American home ownership. That's an institution, and the rule of law. I mean, the something we haven't got to is the robo signing scandal that came out in 2010. Is because during the bubble years, the banks had lost all the paperwork for all these loans, pretty much. I mean, credible estimates think that it's probably most of it. And so they would go to foreclose on people who weren't current on their payments. So they didn't have the right paperwork because it was gone. It never had been done right in the first place, maybe.
Right.
And so they would just forge it. And they had whole floors of people doing document fraud hundreds of times a day, being paid like $13 an hour. It was like, big, thick mortgage files being like, yep, I have personal knowledge of these documents. Boom. Personal knowledge of these documents. Boom. And they've, Obama didn't. He kind of stepped in and got a kind of wrist slap settlement that was partly just straight up fake. They got credit for billions of dollars in write-offs that are legally impermissible to collect in states like California. And it's like, what, how is it a defense of the institutions of the United States to allow like this kind of industrial scale crime to go unpunished because, it's like Attorney General Eric Holder said at a Senate committee, like the banks are too big to prosecute. So it's like, financial stability again. We didn't deal with the problem. And so I mean, it's something I think you see in a lot of instances, today in the party where do we close down the state? Do we take vigorous action as state leaders of the party or city leaders to deal with the pandemic? Back in March, Cuomo and Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio were just sort of squabbling and fighting over doing something. And it wasn't until it was too late, that the disease was already running rampant that they actually started to close stuff down. And I think that it's still just a major problem with the way the party kind of views itself as in this kind of perpetual defensive crouch, when it would be completely not even on like a radical political grounds, but just on a sort of pragmatism that Obama says he endorses, and being like, reasonable and sensible and not, coloring outside the lines. It's like, well, if you have a big hole, you need a big shovel to fill it up.
Right. I mean, I think, I think like some of your criticisms of the Democratic Party, and maybe most of them are accurate. I mean, if we look back to the stimulus that Trump and the government passed in week 4 or 5 or whatever of the pandemic crisis, it was
Yeah.
much closer to wasn't it a voice vote? I could be wrong about that. At some point there was like one of the houses, because, people had like fled and they weren't coming to the actual, building because people were still super freaked out about everything. So they did like a $1.4 trillion stimulus or something on a voice vote. So, I mean, obviously the emergencies are different, and maybe we can't compare them exactly, but if we, so if Hillary Clinton had won and then the pandemic came, could she and the Democrats have ever pulled off doing a voice vote? I don't think so. But the GOP, especially the rank and file, are just, they're just happy to do whatever the leaders say, and they just want to like get tax cuts and make sure no one can have an abortion, and like that's about it. Whereas, the Democrats, like, they all have their interests, and it's much more, and they all have to be like mollified, and think back to like the Cornhusker kickback and all these things, from passing Obamacare, that like everyone had their own little thing that needed to be, they need to be paid off or not literally, but they needed to have their interests satisfied, where it's like there just isn't the symmetry between the parties. And so, like Trump can, I mean, just look how much the GOP office holders have stuck with Trump a month after the election, when it's clear that he's entirely full of shit. But like barely anyone, like 2 or 3 senators have said the emperor has no clothes in terms of this fraud bullshit. Like, and compared to Hillary Clinton conceding, like at 2 a.m. In 2016. Sure. So like there just isn't a symmetry, and it has to do with conservative media and what sorts of people like get involved in politics and their various reasons for doing so. And so, yeah, I mean, the GOP is just always like, unless there's some sort of fundamental change, like they are just better at falling in line, getting this shit done. What's strange is they fell in line behind this guy who has like no stated principles and doesn't care about any of it to begin with, only cares about himself. But, and this is going off on a tangent, but that's why, this whole debate about fascism, not fascism, coup, not coup, like if there's someday someone who is like Trump but is actually capable and intelligent and knows how to do it, tries to pull something off, like it seems a lot riskier than the clownish attempt that he's doing right now, where everyone's like, yeah, we'll just, like, he's having his temper tantrum, like eventually we all realize this will go away. But the institutional GOP is, all to do is complain about him on background at this point, and it's very pathetic. But let me, so you can say one more thing about that, but then I want to talk about the Biden cabinet a little bit also, because that is kind of the time that you were talking about was, from when the crisis, Obama elected, Obama sending his cabinet inauguration, and those early decisions, and we're kind of like in that moment 12 years later. And so you wrote a piece, headline, team of retreads, and in which you were critical of the cabinet nominations so far, and
somewhat critical.
So okay, does anything else you want to say about 10, 12 years ago, the Obama years, before we move on to our cursed present?
I will say, I think that the party has learned a bit. The $600 unemployment benefits, that was huge. I mean, that was the most generous response of any country in the world, I believe. And that came from Michael Bennet, who's a centrist. He's not a radical. And it was partly just because the state unemployment insurance systems are so janky and old. But still, credit where it's due. Nevertheless, Pelosi didn't use her leverage back in March when the thing was collapsing. The stock market was collapsing, to get a longer term relief and critically aid to states and cities. They kept saying we're going to have more bites of the apple, and all the lefties were like, no, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think another one where, in hindsight, it wasn't clear, how long this thing was going to last, and it's lasted longer than I assume Nancy Pelosi thought it was going to last. And I was actually talking to someone a couple of days ago when it was like, the first week of April, and they were saying like, this is going to keep on going until like June or July, and I was like, June or July, like we're going to be like this until June or July, and at that point I'd be like, I would be celebrating if it had lasted 2 or 3 months instead of what we're at now. So so they it was again kind of like they didn't understand the full scope of the problem, and they kind of played it maybe more towards the safe end than otherwise. But still, it was like $1.4 trillion on a voice vote, and I don't know, that initial thing seems mostly successful, except they didn't keep it going.
Oh yeah, and so that's where I would give them a little bit of credit, is to say that rather than worrying about the deficit and trying to to have the smallest thing possible, they just flung huge amounts of money at it, and that's good, yeah. And similarly with the Biden's appointments, I have some criticisms of the way that like these guys spent their time, doing consulting that was just frankly stinks of corruption. In the last 4 years, but at least so far we haven't seen any actual Republicans. Remember Obama kept doing that.
There will probably be one. I mean, usually there is one. Like Bush had a Democrat. I think it's usually transportation, which is funny that like the Rahm thing seems to be focusing on transportation, but like.
If they could get Pat Toomey or some other Republican senator to go, I would accept that. That would be the
smart thing. I mean, the other thing that another. So let me this connects Obama fuck ups to the current era is like, and it has to do. And the title of your article reminded me of it. I've half jokingly have not said that the person responsible for Trump is Doris Kearns Goodwin, because she wrote this book Team of Rivals that Obama read at some point when he was running for president, and it convinced him. And so it's about Lincoln's cabinet, and Lincoln brought in the people who were running against him to like William Seward and so forth to be his cabinet, and it I guess it worked well. And so he thought, I'll bring Hillary Clinton in, and if he hadn't had that idea to bring Clinton in, then she wouldn't have had the stature to become the clear front runner in 2016, and maybe she wouldn't have even run at all, because she wouldn't have had really any foreign policy experience. So that idea, and so he also brought in like Bill Richardson, and obviously Biden was on there. Thankfully, what's his name? The guy who had the affair from North Carolina. I can't remember, John Edwards. I can't remember if that scandal broke before or after. But anyway, he was not there. But yeah, and so like one of the things Obama did was he wanted Janet Napolitano to be running the Department of Homeland Security when she was a senator from Arizona, I believe at the time, and then that enabled. No, she was the governor of Arizona, and that enabled that like a GOP woman filled in, like became the governor. I have the details somewhat wrong, but like so she started. So like that was like a key, like taking some person like, oh, we just need Janet Napolitano. It's so important that Janet Napolitano be the person running this administration, this cabinet department, instead of, and it like he didn't like play out the like bare politics of it, that it let Arizona, I believe, like a GOP governor come in there as this woman. I can't remember her name, but she was kind of a bête noire for a long time of the left, because she was very anti-immigration, and she like it was kind of like a precursor of Trump and like the harshness of her anti-immigrant rhetoric. And if he had just left Napolitano there, like maybe that wouldn't have happened. And so the thing that I've been kind of pleased with in Biden's appointment so far is he's not going for the team of rivals all-stars sort of thing. Like we need like Tony Blinken. The average person has no idea who Tony Blinken is. I haven't heard a lot of these people. The Homeland.
They were deputy.
Yeah, it's like okay. So
that guy was Tony Blinken was deputy undersecretary of something in the State Department.
Yeah. So probably he knows more or less what the job is, and that's sort of good when we look at like Trump's cabinet. Like first of all, can you name a single deputy or undersecretary or anything in terms of like in the entire Trump administration? It's all these like just GOP political hacks, but then
those seats were vacant for years.
Yeah, or no one was there. So it's just like in some ways it does, like the grown-ups are back in charge is the stereotype, but like there will actually be people who are kind of like government bureaucrat types who sort of know what to do in this position, and it won't just be like kindergarten. Or the chaos that we've seen from the administration. So so the fact that like they named this guy who I never even heard of to be is it Homeland Security or something? You noted his name, but like I didn't even recognize it, and I think Mickey Kaus appearing on this platform said he thought he was okay. Just like okay, someone who kind of knows what the deal is, so that he'll sort of do it, and it'll probably be more or less okay. It's like that's sort of the whole Biden, like, yeah, he knows what to do. Like, it won't be crazy anymore. Like that's like the main selling point of Joe Biden, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's in general a reasonable idea to pick people who were or Alejandro Mayorkas.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. Were you familiar with this person before?
Nope.
Yeah, I never heard the name before.
I heard his name a couple times, but yeah, I mean, people who had been the deputy previously and moving them up a rank, like that seems that's like perfectly reasonable. I mean, my criticism of them was more about especially the foreign policy team. They just set up all these, basically come bribe us consultant shops. One of them was like West Exec, named after the West Wing, or it seems pretty clearly to be a reference to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, come trade on my government experience. And, and so in that sense, and the sense that they're all institutional creatures of the institutional Democratic Party for the most part, and often pretty elderly. Janet Yellen is 74, I believe. It doesn't speak to me that very well that they will just be leaning on every possible executive authority to do the kind of calculations I was describing before, to be like, well, we got to make sure the economy's in as good a shape as possible in 2022. We're going to get rinsed in the midterms.
Right.
So I guess it remains to be seen. As I say in the piece, nothing would be happier than if, Neera Tanden turns the Office of Management and Budget into just a crusading, juggernaut of justice.
Okay, I wanted to bring up Neera Tanden. So the people who are watching this, either probably you haven't heard of Neera Tanden or you have a very strong opinion of Neera Tanden. And so if for people who have never heard of Neera Tanden, who is Neera Tanden?
She's been a long time, I think, the president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, which is a Democratic think tank, sort of a shadow government, you might say.
Yeah, it kind of set up to be like the heritage of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and they raise a ton of money. I mean, this is why Neera has been the president of CAP for so long, because she can raise money from Clinton world, all the big Clinton donors, as well as, Walmart and the, United Arab Emirates and stuff like that.
Right. And so it was thought that if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, Tanden may have been chief of staff.
Yeah, that was a likely pick. And why they're giving, OMB it's a very boring, it's like the, regulatory clearinghouse for the executive branch. And then they prepare the budget every year. And it's real dull, real, you think it's like, who's a great type of personality to run this? You want someone who is quiet, competent, low drama.
It's often the phrase "green eye shades" is often used when this department is described in the press, because they're like running the numbers and doing stuff that is rarely gets mentioned in the press in terms of budgeting and very boring stuff. Yeah. The thing you haven't mentioned about Tanden is that she is extremely online. And basically, I guess it must have started before 2016, but she argues with people on Twitter, and also she is like a born poster, and I've wondered how does she have the time to be on Twitter so much, when she has this job, and it's very strange. And I actually muted her name because I just didn't care about her at all, and so people on the left really don't like her for various reasons. That I'll just leave it there. But so why was she picked for this role? So the conspiracy theory would be, you got to give the Senate GOP a sacrificial lamb so that they can claim they have a victory, and they'll go after her instead of going after someone who is more important or something like Janet Yellen. Although I assume that Yellen will just get confirmed easily, but who knows? But yeah, so that's one theory. Or it's kind of like she had to land somewhere for some reason. She had like so many chits, and that they had to put her somewhere, so they put her in like the the most boring role possible. It's like the annex in The Office where they were like, people don't go there usually, and so yeah,
if the annex was in charge of like, whether Wall Street gets regulated or not.
Right. Okay. So even though it's boring, it is a powerful position and one that, someone can wield influence there, if they know how to like manipulate the levers of power. What's your theory for why they
subordinates?
Yeah, and then it was alleged that she punched or pushed someone at some point, and yeah, she just seemed she's kind of like a gaffe machine even though she's not a politician, like she just like embarrasses herself a lot, but still seems able to, she like gets wealthy individuals or corporations or whatever to write big checks for the Center for American Progress. So what is your theory about why Neera Tanden got this appointment?
I mean, the conspiracy one is plausible on the face of it, but that strikes me as a little too conniving for somebody like Biden. I think it's just, she's been a loyal team player for many years, and they're just handing out, it's like, well, we can't give you this and that. How about that? And there's really not all that much concern with whether she can do the job or not, I don't know, it would, honestly, that would speak well of Biden if that was, or Team Biden, if that was their intention to sort of throw her under the bus,
right? So
that they can put, some no-name, just random bureaucrat who knows how to read the U.S. code and isn't emailing people's editors at 2:00 in the morning, like and Neera is known to do. But I guess we'll see. I honestly have not the slightest idea.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, she must be sort of a good bureaucratic infighter type to like rise to this position to begin with. She must have worked in the Clinton administration or Clinton White House originally, and then moved to CAP.
Yeah, she was a Clinton. When Clinton was in the Senate, she was a staffer for Clinton for many years, I believe. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so she must, there must be some reason that, well, maybe not, but I would think there's some reason that she attained her position and continues to hold her position, and maybe that secret, skill set or something is what...
money. It's money.
Okay, yeah, well, so she's a good schmoozer or something, she can talk to the Emir of Abu Dhabi along with the Walmart CEO and get $1 million checks.
Well, it's connections, this was the New York Times article about how she punched Fez Shakir, Bernie's campaign manager, allegedly. She says she only pushed him because he asked Hillary Clinton a question about the Iraq War. But that her mother was like, yes, Cap runs all on Neera because she's out there raising money all the time. And that, there's a skill to it, I think, but it's also just about connections, It's like you know who to pay to be able to get money, to get influence, in the party and so on.
Usually that type of person gets like an ambassadorship. That's like traditionally understood. The big donors will get a sweet, sweet SWEET, ambassador to the Court of St. James or something like that, and that's their plum sort of thing. And I think that that's the like remaining sort of spoil system thing in American government. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see. But I think so Jared Bernstein is the other person who I guess you mentioned and spoke about positively. I mean, he was on Biden's staff during the Obama administration. So
he's been Biden's. I think he was his like chief economic advisor when he was vice president, and has been a probably Biden's closest economic advisor for many years, which is weird because like he's a pretty lefty dude. He wrote a book with Dean Baker about getting back to full employment. This was a number of years ago, before the whole austerity thing had sort of passed. And he was arguing against austerity, the whole of the 2009-2010 period. Yeah, I mean, I think Biden's very uh, he's a pretty warm personality. You know, he likes interpersonal connections a lot, and Jared is, I don't know if you've ever met him. I think I've spoken to him a couple of times.
He may have been on blogging he has back in the day. We definitely had Dean Baker on it at some point, so he may have been on once or twice.
He's a very, very friendly guy, really warm, very, I mean, just in a town, especially like DC, which is full of just snakes, you know, he's a rare, genuine guy who's just like, you know, interested and has like really good politics. And I think Biden just likes him. And his, you know, his advice has always been really good. And so, you know, that gives me a little bit of hope. You know, I think there are a number of people like that, you know, scattered. Heather Boushey seems, you know, reasonably all right. I don't know her, but she's, you know, been sort of progressive economist, and she's also on the Council of Economic Advisors, I believe. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, as I say, you know, it's a real question, and I would be very surprised if these folks turn out to be like super aggressive, you know, and just like blitzing stuff through as quick as they can, like Trump does, you know, or it's like pass the Muslim ban, get it struck down, pass it again, and slightly, you know, and just like hit him and hit him and hit him. But who knows, you know? I mean,
yeah, I mean, sort of like the fact that the Trump and the GOP are willing to nominate for like a lifetime, you know, circuit court judgeship, like a 33-year-old has never tried a case or something, just belongs to the Federalist Society. Like, there's no like opposite party version of that. Like, the Democrats, like, yes, they want people who are going to rule their way, but like they believe in like, you know, the rule of law, and like, yeah, there's just, and there's no Federalist Society equivalent on the left to like funnel these people in. So that sort of, it makes it so there's been all these fuck ups in the throughout the past 4 years, but like they have like lodged some policy wins and gotten a lot of judges confirmed and stuff, but like the Democrats just aren't going to run the same like playbook of appointing, you know.
As long as Neil Katyal doesn't get a you know, nomination or anything, he's the guy, if people don't know, who was arguing against Nestle and Cargill being held accountable for using slave labor. And he was Obama's Solicitor General for a period of time. So
yeah, that seems. I mean, it seems like once you do that, you're committed to the sort of the corporate track for the rest of your professional career.
Corporate slavery track.
But well, you know, the golden handcuffs, as they say. But so I had one of the. Oh, I guess the other thing I want to say is, you know, I've been saying for a while. I mean, I think I was proven right that Biden was basically, you know, was going to win, obviously. And also I've been saying on Twitter, like, you know, Biden, like, okay, he's this doddering old man, and he's clearly like lost some of his, you know, cognitive power over the years. And he also has had a number of shitty, even when he had his full cognitive powers, like he was, you know, made a number of shitty decisions as a senator. And yet somehow I think he basically ran like a campaign that had no really major strategic errors of any kind, and like even the things that people tried to gin up, like whether he would like denounce or embrace court packing, and he was like, I'm going to wait. You know, that in retrospect that looks great, because obviously there's not going to be any court packing with 50 Democrats at the most in the Senate. So him, you know, biting his tongue on that made sense. And so his, you know, I regret to say that his Joe Biden's political instincts seem better than the Twitter liberal left hive mind's political instincts. And, you know, while I'm not optimistic about, you know, Morning in America returning with President Joe, it's like, I don't know, maybe we just need to like see what he thinks. And I mean, it's just going to be a, you know, after the insanity of the past 4 years, it's just going to be like more boring, and that'll be a good thing. Unfortunately, we like the need to think anew is very strong right now because of the pandemic and the state of the economy, and, you know, long-term threats like climate change and so forth. So I've been saying, you know, return to normalcy is what America wanted and chose Biden, but, you know, it might be impossible to return to, you know, we'll never get back to like 2015 normalcy, let alone like early 2020 normalcy, based on how bad things have gotten with the virus. But so I'm not super optimistic. But at the same time, like, yeah, he basically played this thing. He didn't have a major gaffe all year basically, and it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
He let Trump self-destruct.
yeah, he did. I mean, I will say I think Biden got very lucky, in terms of the timing of South Carolina primary. I mean, he got rinsed in the first three. And also just being able to run, in objectively pretty favorable conditions, maybe not as favorable as they seemed. And just running against a guy who basically made the argument against himself really well. But yeah, no, I mean, this maybe comes back to Obama, who I would say, for all his other faults, he knew how to run a campaign. He ran really, really good campaigns in 2008 and 2012, and he knew what to say. I mean, in terms of just like raw political instincts, how to win this election. We haven't seen anybody like him in a long time. But where if I could offer Team Biden any advice, it would be to say that read my buddy Jeff Spross's piece in the American Prospect, which is about delivering concrete policy victories can also be a political winner over and above, how you run a particular campaign. And for example, the senior vote didn't used to be a thing. That was Social Security and Medicare basically made the senior vote into that, the very high participation block vote that it is now. And the reason is that these policies gave people the economic stability and the sort of feeling like they had a stake in politics that they needed to participate. And there are a lot of ways that Biden could do that if he was so inclined, that would, put him on a better sort of strategic footing where he could start doing another campaign in 2022, 2024. Where, the objective economic conditions or whatever, are more favorable. And so, will he listen to me? Almost certainly not. But I hope somebody is telling him that. Jared, we're all pulling for you.
Well, again, I realize we're switching one Jared for another, and the Jared with this Jared Bernstein, I'm sure will do a much better job. Although he probably won't be doing every single thing in the federal government as Jared Kushner seems to have been doing over the past couple of years. Okay, so why don't we've got over an hour, so why don't we stop it there? So Ryan, thanks for coming on and letting me push back on some things you've written about. And so you're at the Week. We'll include the link to your contributor page there. You're on Twitter. And what is your Twitter handle?
At Ryan L. Cooper. And I also have a podcast of my own, Left Anchor, that you can find online if you're so inclined. Okay, cool. So we'll include the link to that below on the Blogging site. And you can follow me on Twitter at ARYHCW. So thank you again, Ryan, and thanks to all of our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks.